Okay, in the last video, we had left off at the point where we could see what all are the users that are registered on our application. Now, in this next part, we're going to do two things. The first thing is we're going to see if the user is online or offline and display that on this page. We're going to do that by basically storing the ID of all the devices that the user logs in from, and then display if the user is online or offline by either showing a green circle around the user or a red circle around the user. Secondly, we'll enable private chats so that you can chat with an individual user. So let's begin. First thing that we'll do is go into the home view controller and start by storing the device ID of the user into a variable. So let's start with this. Let device ID equal to UI device dot current device dot identifier for vendor dot UUID string. Store the device ID. Secondly, we're going to set up a function which we're going to call, let's call it manage connections, and we're going to pass in a user ID of the user, which is going to be a string. Inside this, we'll create a reference to our database where we'll store the status of the user, whether the user is online or offline. So create a reference to the database. We're going to do that by saying let my connections, let's call this my connections ref is equal to FIR database. For that, we're going to have to import Firebase database. FIR database dot reference with path, and the path we're going to give it is user profile. Pass in the user ID that we're going to pass through the function, and inside that we'll create a node called connections, and inside that we'll put it under the device ID because the user can be online from multiple devices and we only want to log the user out from the specific device that the user logs out from. So we have that here. Next, what we'll do is equal to my connection ref dot child, and we'll call the node inside this online, and when the user logs in, we'll set its value to true. So when the user logs in, set the value to true. What we'll also do is we'll also set a timestamp which will show the last time the user logged in. So we'll call that last online dot set value, and inside that we'll put in a ns date dot time interval since 1970, and we'll now create a observer which will monitor if the user is logged in or logged out. Let's call that my connections ref dot observe, my connections ref dot observe event type is going to be if any value is changed, so we'll say dot value, and with block, suppose the data is returned, we'll call it snapshot in, and we're going to use a new function here which is going to be called guard, and we'll say guard let connected equal to snapshot dot value as a boolean where connected, else run this block. So we don't want to return anything if nothing is returned. So basically what the guard statement does is it's unlike an if statement, and guard statements only run if the conditions are not met. So it's basically we're trying to catch the negative result instead of the positive result. So if we know that a boolean is returned, then it's okay. Update the page. If it's not returned, then don't. If we've got no update, then don't return anything. So statements only run if the conditions are not met. Okay, now we've set this up. You'll understand this more clearly once we actually call it. So let's see what we're going to do. So one thing we just need to correct over here is this is not be connection. This is going to be connections. So just correcting that. Now if we come back up in the viewDidLoad method, this is where we're going to call the manage functions, manage connections function. So once we've got the user logged in, we've got his details. Here we'll call manage connections with the UID of the user. So let's try and run this now and you'll see what happens. So running this, and we'll open up our Firebase console. So as you see, this connections tab is updated and it's showing last online at this time and online equal to true. But right now if the user logs out, nothing gets updated over here. It just still shows that the user is online. So let's just try and log back in again. And see, last online got updated, but online remained at true. So let's manage the logout now. So if you come into the did tap logout function, what we'll do over here is, first we need to store the user here as well. So let's say let user equal to firauth.auth, because we need the UID of the user, dot current user. And then say let my connections ref. Again, let's create a reference. Fir database dot reference with path, and this is again going to be user profile, and this is going to be user dot UID. We'll have to force unwrap that. Connections self and what we'll do over here is call my connections ref dot child, and we'll update the online node to a value of false, and we'll also update the last online to the time when the user last logged out. So now we have that. Let's try and run this again. So we saw that, oh yeah, we have to keep in mind one thing, that because we're using the simulator creates a new device ID every time, but this will not happen when we're actually using a real device. So let's just delete the earlier one, delete that out. This is the new one that we have. It's showing online is true. Let's log this out. So as of now, we can update our database with the user status, whether he's online or offline. But you'll see in the actual app, we don't see any change, because when you go to the user's collection view controller, it just shows the users there. It does not indicate which user is online or which user is offline. So let's do that now. So let's go into our users collection view controller. And earlier, last time, what we had done is we had created separate arrays for the users' names, for the users' images. We're going to change that now, and we'll just create one object which is going to store the names, images, and the online status together, just to make it easier to display. So let's create a new array which is going to be called users array, and let's call it an array of any object. and just initialize that. We'll also create another object which will store the current logged in user. So let's call that logged in user, and it'll be of type any object. So now inside the viewDidLoad method, let's store the current user. So self dot logged in user is equal to fir auth. For that we'll have to import Firebase auth, fir auth dot auth dot current user. And now what we'll have to do is we come inside this for loop that we had created. We were going through the details of each user because each user is under a specific user ID. So we were going for user ID, comma details in self.usersDict. What we'll do is we'll create another for loop which will be called for device ID, comma connection in connections. And for that what we'll have to do is we'll have to store the connections first from the data that we get, which is going to be details dot object for key connections as ns dictionary. We'll run a if condition and we'll see if connection dot object for key online, ensure that it is false downcast as a bool. If it is true, then what we'll do is we'll set a key on the details object, set value true for key online. So the user is online, add another value in the details. Else what we do is if details dot object for key online not equal to true, set the value to false. The reason why we're doing another if check inside the else block is that because with the user is allowed to log in from multiple devices, if the user on the first device is logged in, it will change this to true. But if in the second device it is not logged in, if you don't have this if block, it will set it to false, which will be wrong actually because the user is online on one device and offline on the other. So we check that if this object key is already set as true, then don't change it to false. Only if the earlier devices were also offline, then set this device also to set this key to offline. Next what we do is we'll make sure that the user that's been checked currently is not the currently logged in user. Only then add this user to the details block. First we'll store the UID of the users for reference, and then we'll say self.usersArray.append details. Because if you remember, in our app we can see ourselves online as well, which is pointless. We don't want to see ourselves, we only want to see the other users. So this is what this block does. It checks if the current user that is being seen in this for block is the logged in user, then don't add it. Only if it is not the current user, set this current user's UID in the details block and then append the user to the users array. Now what we need to do is we don't need this one, users images array. We don't need user names array. Similarly over here we don't need user names array or user images array. And if you remember that we had done the number of items was from the user images array, which we're going to change. We're going to make this return self.usersArray.count because now we're using only one object. And also we're going to have to update the self item at index path. So what we're going to do here is we're going to change this, and it's going to be let image URL equal to, let's first comment this out and say let image URL equal to ns URL, it will be type string self.users array index path dot row profile pic small, and force downcast that as a string. Next we have to do let image data equal to ns data contents of URL and put in image URL. So like you see, this is much better. We have the complete users details in our in our self.users array, and we can just extract the information we need. We're going to have to force unwrap this, and now in the cell.user image.image set this new UI image. If you remember, if you go to the collection view cell, the user's image, and we have to set the user's name. Now is the part that shows which user is online or offline by putting either a green circle around the user or a red circle around the user. So add a border to the images. So for that we do is cell.user_image.layer.border width is equal to, let's give it a width of 1.5, and we'll check if self.users array index path dot row the online key if as downcasted as a bool. If it is true, that means the user is online. We set the cell.userImage dot layer dot border color equal to UI color dot green color dot CG color. Else cell dot user image border color is equal to UI color dot red color dot CG color. So if you remember, here is where we checked if the connection of the user is online. The same thing we're checking here. If that user is online, set its border color to green, else set its border color to red. We also need to set the text, the name of the user. So we don't want the full name of the user, we only want the first name. So get the first name, and what we do is let first name equal to self.users array index path dot row dot row, get the name, we want to make sure it's a string, force unwrap that and separate it by a space using component separated by string. This gets the, so we've got the first name. Now update the name, which is cell.username.text equal to first name. We're also just going to make a slight change on our main storyboard. If we come here, just select the label and stretch it out fully so that the full name is displayed. As of now, we can see that the name gets cut out. So stretch that fully, align it to the center, and update the constraints by clicking on this, update constraints. Now before you test this out, you want to make sure that you log your users out and log them back in so that they all get a connections tab in the database. So once you've done that, we can test this out. So there you can see we've got two other users. One of them is online, one of them is offline. Let's confirm that. If we come here and we see that this user is online on one device and offline on the other device, we put this to false as well, which will get updated here. It did get updated, but as you can see that the users got duplicated. Let's correct that. What we need to just do is we need to just reset the self.users array every time the data loads so that we have an empty array. So let's do that. Once we receive the user's data, let's reset this array to an empty array. Now if we run this, we should see it getting updated. Currently both users are offline. If we change this user's status to online on any device, we see it getting updated here. Similarly for the other user, here on any device, we set this to true. We should see it get updated. There it is. So now that we know which user is online or which user is offline, the last part that's remaining of this tutorial is to enable private chats.